A new Gallup poll shows that Democrats are losing their grip on the greater public as we head into midterms, as well as Republicans' growing popularity. Over the course of 2021, the number of self-identifying Democratic respondents dropped 7 points, while self-identifying Republican respondents rose 7 points. Both the 9-point Democratic advantage in the first quarter and the 5-point Republican edge in the fourth quarter are among the largest Gallup has measured for each party in any quarter since it began regularly measuring party identification and leaning in 1991.
However, Gallup also reports that despite these findings, independents are still the largest political group in the U.S., with 42% of 2021 survey respondents declining to identify with either party. Host and executive producer of The Watch List, J.R. Jackson, and policy director at the Conservative Partnership Institute, Rachel Bovard, are here with us to discuss. Welcome.
Good morning.
So, Rachel, these are good results for the right, and I think they're indicative of the kind of failure of the Biden administration, of Team Biden, to deliver on their promise of a kind of return to normal. Trump is crazy. We're done with crazy. We're going to be done with the pandemic. Everything's going to be good again and normal again, and you're going to be able to relax. And that hasn't happened because the pandemic hasn't let it happen, and inflation and the economy, et cetera. What do you make of it?
So I think that's right. I think all the polling going into 2020 showed that that's what voters expected of Biden, was this return to boring normalcy. But I think it would be a mistake to just put it at Biden's feet. I think when you look at the whole Gallup analysis, it only focused at the federal level, when I think for a lot of people in this instance, all politics is local. And I think, you have these mayors and these local officials and these school boards that are all participating in this not return to normal. And I think it's, people are experiencing it in their daily lives in a way they never have before. And so I do think the federal stuff is important, but I think even at the local level, you're really just seeing people observing the Democratic Party in their states and in their localities, refusing to let them get back to normal, and worse, sort of tyrannizing the whole thing to sort of, make their lives even worse than they were before.
And JR, do you think some of this is contagious? It almost feels like Biden has the stench of failure around him, and that the failure is begetting more failure, that is begetting less popularity, which begets more failure. Do you see this as kind of a downward cycle?
Well, I mean, I can see what you're saying, because look, momentum does work both ways. That's just in anything. It comes to competition or even politics. Once you start downtrending in one direction, people kind of see that and pile on, especially, I think, when it comes to politics, because when you have the opposing party that's looking to find something, some vulnerability, some hole to exploit for the next election or for a chance to overtake, they're going to find it and they're going to use it. So if there's things that are there that's showing some of the infighting, some of the back and forth, some of the discussions on which policies to pursue and how vigorously to pursue those things, sometimes it turns folks off, and they see that happening. It's why, it doesn't matter the party. Whenever there's any kind of back and forth within a party, the other party will then say, well, look at this. They don't know what they're doing. They're not legislating. Look what's happening with our economy. Look what's happening with our society. They just don't really have it together. And when you're sitting there and you have the spotlight on you as the president and in control of Congress, the American people have no one else to think to blame except for who they see as the ones that are controlling things.
Rachel, do you think Republicans are going to actually seize this opportunity and retake power and then govern according to what the people actually want, or will they squander this opportunity per usual?
So my biggest fear is that Republicans are going to look at this and think they're gaining voters because they're competent, because they've actually done something that's, a forward-looking agenda. And no, that's not the case. As in so many midterm cycles, the Republicans, I think, are gaining, voters and support out of desperation, that people are looking at the implosion of the other side and saying, okay, well, maybe I'll give these guys a shot. No, Republicans have a lot of work to do here. And from what I'm seeing out of the House and the Senate Republicans, Mitch McConnell hasn't even put out an agenda for what he's going to run on in 2022. And Kevin McCarthy is still talking about, a parent's bill of rights and energy independence, good things, but not necessarily addressing the magnitude of the crisis that we're in. they're not yet prepared to pick up this mantle. They haven't.
And Trump was asked. Trump was asked by Newsmax. There's a clip of that I think I saw yesterday. What's the first thing you do, or first thing Republicans should do if they're back in power? And he didn't even answer. He went into some thing about how he'd been robbed or whatever.
You got to have a plan, people. This is politics 101.
And JR, I wanted to ask you about this. Did you want to respond to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the policy is the driving force. And again, so I agree here, Rachel. So the Republican Party does have to figure a way to have some kind of policy that resonates with American people, right? Outside of things like, hey, look how bad they are. And I get it. As I said before, every party does that. But I think part of the groups of people, we saw independents start leaning more one way or another when it comes to this poll, is because they're not seeing much as far as policy that'll pursue something that looks like an optimistic future for Americans. So whichever way you lean, as this polling was showing, you have to see some policy that's going to lead you out of it. So, I mean, I as I said, I agree that maybe there's issues with Republicans trying to find the right policy to convince people, but Democrats have many times convinced people of policies and then not carried out those policies. So everyone's kind of looking for someone to lead to some kind of positivity here.
And on that point, I wanted to get your take on the Paul Begala comments that have been circulating. So Democratic strategist Begala, he was on CNN recently with Alyssa Farah Griffin, where he suggested that it's not Democratic Party leaders, but it's followers that have it all wrong. Let's take a listen.
Did President Biden put more effort into getting infrastructure passed, for example?
Well, he got infrastructure passed, and that's a good thing because success can breed success. He is putting the full force of the presidency behind it. I think the problem for the Democrats right now is not that they have bad leaders. They have bad followers.
And so what he goes on to say there is that the problem is that there isn't enough energy behind Biden. There isn't enough grassroots energy. There aren't people pushing Biden hard enough. And if people would push Biden harder, then he'd be able to get more done. I have my own thoughts on this clip, but curious what you drew from it.
Well, you expanded there on what he said, right? The clip is going to stop right when he stopped and said, we've got bad followers. That's the problem. So you can't come up with sound bites like that as a Democratic strategist and say, hey, our leaders are great, our followers are bad. Your followers are your voters. That's your base. Those are people that get you in office as you're looking down the barrel of 2022 right now. So yeah, the thing is the expansion about the story about Dr. King and someone who worked next to him and how they had to galvanize support from the community. All that is good and fine to talk about that. But why is it posed as now the followers currently are bad? We always talk about how current and even new swath of voters, particularly Democratic or progressive voters, are these radicals who are crazy and wild-eyed and want all these things that just don't make any sense. Hey, back then when Dr. King was marching and making speeches and galvanizing support, that was radical. Let's not forget, that was radical to do those things until it became normal to do those things because that's just normalcy. But someone has to push it in that direction. So you can talk about how we need to push more or maybe do things more in the community or maybe galvanize support, but saying it like that does not get it done. So the leadership, and if you want to say the followers are bad men, the leadership has to appreciate the followers and give some kind of direction to go here.
Yeah, and I thought it was extremely rich coming from Begala because Begala and people like him have done everything they can over the last 5 years to try to cut the knees out from under kind of the Sanders wing of the Democratic Party, the party that was actually kind of really demanding the types of things and pushing with the type of energy that Begala says is needed to get things done. So they kill all that. They replace it with the carcass of Joe Biden that then the party just kind of drags across the finish line as just a negation of Donald Trump. And then they turn around and say, why aren't people more excited about this?
It's hard to expect excitement when you don't produce excitement. It's just an easy equation,
Well, and I think, Rachel, I think the media tends to push Democratic leadership or insiders to forget who the actual followers of the Democratic Party are and to mislead them about what issues they're fired up on. Like, they want to keep the party. They want to keep the media wants the party to stay focused on Russia and January 6th and, some like very far left social issues, not so much the economic stuff, but the social stuff. And it like leads the party astray almost certainly inadvertently because the media wants the Democratic Party to succeed. But that's the result.
Yeah, I think Democrats do have an echo chamber problem with the media, with social media, you name it. Although I would be remiss if I didn't point out, I do think this is a problem in both parties. There's some weird vortex that people walk into when they come into DC. Then this hubris overtakes them and they're like, no, we're the good guys. We're not the baddies. And it's like, no. This is not how you treat your base. You never condescend to your base. Actually, right before this broadcast, I was listening to a podcast where Dan Crenshaw speculated that people who disagree with him just don't understand Congress. And it's like, bro, no, that's never what you do. You never lecture your voters. The voters aren't the problem. You are there to work for the voters. And as soon as people come to Washington, they seem to forget that.
I think the voters and the politicians are the problem. Both can be bad. Leaders and the followers, everyone is bad. Elites and the people, they're all bad.
Everyone just listen to me and everything will be fine. There you go. JR, Rachel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
And we will have more Rising right after this.